what's up you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if you're new, and today I will be discussing horror movies that I have a soul connection with. Now I'm doing this video today because I was commenting back and forth with one of my subscribers. His name is Billy, and he said, I'd love to see a list of those movies you have special connections with. So, little comment shout out, that's the reason why I'm making this video today. I feel like all movie fans, not just horror fans, have movies that they have soul connections with. Movies they watch when they're having a good day or a bad day, like movies they watch when they're happy or sad, just movies that always can be comforting for them, or just movies that you love to a degree that you just can't really explain. So like movies that you might have an obsession with for whatever reason, or just movies that speak to your soul. I feel like we all have those movies, and so I'm gonna share 6 of mine with you guys today. The first movie that I want to share with you guys today is The Corpse Bride. This movie came out in 2005, I believe. So this DVD is probably from 2005. I talked about it in one of my collection videos, but this movie and we go way back. We have something very special. I don't know how many times this movie has been watched, like this particular DVD. It has to be like 50. I mean, there was just a period of like several years where I would watch this movie year round. It didn't matter if it wasn't fall, if it wasn't around Halloween time. Like, this was my horror movie as a child. It's not like technically horror, but it is obviously children's horror. It involves going to the land of the dead, like she's a literal corpse. So it's horror for children, and it was just one of my favorite movies growing up, and I still love it to this day. From a very young age, I really appreciated claymation, and this movie especially like was so aesthetically pleasing. Like, if you have never seen this movie, I'll show you the opening credits, because as he's like drawing this beautiful butterfly, just the strokes of his pen and everything, it is so pleasing, like so pleasing. So this movie just always relaxed me as a kid. I loved the way that their hands moved and the way that they moved as these little claymation figures. I loved all the weird shapes of the bodies of all of the people. But one of the best things about this movie, aside from the fact that the stars are Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, the songs in this movie, bops. I don't know any other way to describe them. Bops. Like the song about the way that Victoria died and how she was deceived or whatever. Like the first song when he's in the land of the dead, it's so colorful and so fun and like jazzy. Oh, it's just...
Tell you a story, make a skeleton cry of our own deliciously lovely corpse bride.
It's sensational, frankly. And then there are also like really gorgeous piano songs and like really gorgeous piano duets and stuff like that. It's just so beautifully well done, and the claymation is so well crafted. It's just a gorgeous movie. So if you've never seen it, even if you're an adult, I highly recommend it. Now these next 4 movies actually are all thanks to my grandpa. He started showing me sci-fi movies and like thriller horror movies when I was really young, because he's a huge fan of a lot of the classics, and I'm talking like from the 50s, okay, like oldies classics. And I love my grandpa so much. Like, we have a really good relationship, and anytime that I would go and visit him, whether I was with my family or even now to this day when I go and I visit them on my way to college and stuff, we always watch a couple of movies while I'm there. It's just like kind of our thing, because he's been showing me his favorite movies since I was really young. And the first one that I want to talk about is Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. This movie was the first ever psychological horror movie I think that I ever saw. It's like not even really horror, but it is though, because I think that the first time he tried to show it to me, I was probably like 6 or 7 years old, and I got too scared of the movie and we had to turn it off. Even though there's literally like no gore, nothing that's like actually scary about the movie, except for the psychological components, which are horrifying. Which, if you've never heard of this movie, I should probably give you a synopsis. In Santa Mira, California, Dr. Miles Bennell is baffled when all his patients come to him with the same complaint. Their loved ones seem to have been replaced by emotionless imposters. Despite others' dismissive denials, Dr. Bennell, his former girlfriend Becky, and his friend Jack soon discover that the patient's suspicions are true. An alien species of human duplicates grown from plant-like pods is taking over the small town. So to me, the idea that an alien entity would take over my mind and body and leave me as this like emotionless drone, like empty shell of myself, was so horrifying. horrifying to me as a child, and it still is now. Or your loved ones being taken from you in the same way and them being there, but they're not really there. Horrifying. And it definitely reflects the fears of the population at the time, because it was like, who around you is secretly a commie or whatever. However, because that's so implicit and like not really an actual theme of the movie, it can be applied to basically any generation of like societal issues. Like for instance, now you can watch this movie and you're like, huh, it's kind of like these days, where now you look around and you're like, who out here is secretly a racist, you know? So because it's still so applicable, despite being made in 1956, it like hasn't aged a day. And it's also filmed in black and white, which just adds to the drama. I do love me a black and white film sometimes, I will say. Anyways, I could go on and on about that movie. Maybe I should make a video talking about like classics and stuff like that, because there are a lot of classics that I feel like are highly underrated. Like I never hear anyone talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I think there was a remake in like the 80s or something, but people don't talk about the original, so I'm talking about it. But that being said, moving on, because I have another classic from the 50s, I want to talk about The House of Wax from 1953. Now, my sole connection with this movie comes from the fact that this was the first horror movie to give me like really insane nightmares. I've always had really vivid dreams all growing up. I've always been really susceptible to getting nightmares, and I think that the first time I watched this movie, I was probably also 7 or 8. I was probably a little bit older, because this one is a great deal more scary than Invasion of the Body Snatchers, so they probably waited till I was a little bit older to show it to me. But Vincent Price, like, what a talent. I feel like he was one of the OG boogeymen, because in this movie, there are scenes where he's chasing our lead character down the street, and like he's just in the shadows and he's like in his trench coat and he's just this freaky little man. There's another scene where he's like crawling into her window and he's like in her bedroom. And when I tell you, I had nightmares. This was one of the scariest movies I think that I ever watched when I was a child, aside from one more that I will be getting into. But this movie is just so well done, and I feel like some of the horror elements really still hold up to this day. Like, this movie was so tasteful in the way that it did things that even like the practical effects and stuff, I don't feel like any of that really aged very much. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. Like, I don't think it'll really be scary to you by today's standards by any means, but I was really horrified of this movie when I was a child. I still think that in concept, it's horrifying. It's an excellent movie, and I will always have a soul connection with it for it being one of the first movies to ever give me a nightmare. Now the next movie that was introduced to me by my grandpa when I believe I was about 8 years old is the movie Signs by M. Night Shyamalan. And I don't have any type of spiritual connection with this movie because of like the religious undertones. I really don't care about them like at all. The religious stuff just adds to a really well crafted story, and so like I appreciate it, but that's not the reason why I feel a spiritual connection to this movie. That has everything to do with the fact that this is one of my grandpa's favorite movies, and then it became one of my favorite movies, and it was a movie that we've watched together probably like 5 or 6 times. This is also probably one of the first alien movies that I ever saw, aside from like E.T. And my grandpa also showed me The Day That the Earth Stood Still. I think that movie's from 1951. But other than that, I don't really think I had seen any alien movies up to this point. So it was also one of the first alien movies I ever saw, and I love alien movies. I love space movies, like anything to do with space. I love that whole sci-fi subgenre. So me and this movie, we have something special. And also just the cast is so good. Like, it's such a dynamite cast, and you really feel like you have a bond with these family members. Like, they're all so sweet and memorable in their own way. So when they're all eating together and stuff, you very much feel like a part of this family, and it's very much a comfort film for me. It's also so well done, and despite seeing it so many times, the jump scares almost always work for me. And granted, I haven't seen it in a couple years, so I don't really know how well it would work for me now because I'm like desensitized and stuff, but it's a really good movie overall anyways. But anyways, moving right along to the fourth and final movie that my grandpa showed me that I have a soul connection with, and that is Jaws. I think we all feel some type of way about this movie, but the reason that I do, you know, of course it has something to do with my grandpa. It's also one of my dad's favorite movies, and we've watched it together several times over the years. But the reason why I have a soul bond with this movie is because it's probably the first horror movie to change my perceptions about something unique in the real world. Obviously with movies like House of Wax, like the boogeyman, I was already scared of strangers and strange men and stuff. Like, that didn't really change my perception on anything. anything, but Jaws completely changed my perception of the ocean. I think the first time that I saw Jaws, I was probably about 7 years old, and I had just never fully grasped, like as a child, I had never fully grasped the depth and how much I didn't know or understand about the ocean. And then you see something like Jaws and you're like, oh, there are very real, like very frightening things in the real world that I just didn't ever really think about before. But I grew up in the suburbs of LA, so like we went to the beach pretty frequently, and for the next like 5 or so trips after seeing Jaws, I didn't go out in the water past like where I could stand up. And I loved boogie boarding, like I loved getting out there. I've always been a really strong swimmer, so even when I was a little kid, like I loved going out into the water. But after seeing Jaws, you would not catch me further than where I could stand up. You just simply wouldn't. Especially because I live in California, like the water here is by no means clear. Like you can't see anything coming. You don't know what you're stepping on most of the time even. And so after seeing Jaws, when you step on like some seaweed or something and it feels like a fish, like oh my goodness. It took a long time for me to actually like begin to go back out into the water normally and like going out deep and swimming again. It took a very long time. Granted, shark attacks are extremely rare, but like when you're a child, after I'd watched that movie at like 7 years old, you don't really have the rationale developed in your brain to tell you like it's really rare, it's not gonna happen, you'll be fine. Because at the end of the day, you really just don't know, especially if you're a tiny child. So that one stuck with me. And of course, Jaws is just an immaculately well-made movie. It's the best shark movie ever. And I forgot to hold it up. Sorry, here it is. Jaws. I have Jaws. I also have all 3 of the sequels, although I've only ever watched the second movie because the second movie was pretty bad, so I haven't really had interest in watching the other sequels. They also don't have the original sheriff in them or anything, so I'm like, where's the interest? But anyways, moving right along to the last movie that I have a soul connection with, and that would be The Ring from 2002. I don't even remember the first time that I watched this movie. I just remember always loving it. But it doesn't matter because I literally love this movie so much. Not only do I have it on DVD, but yeah, I have it on VHS too, just because like, it's literally, the whole movie is about a VHS tape. And so the fact that I have it on a VHS tape, it just, okay, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. I just purchased this, and on that note, I will be doing an updated horror collection video very soon because I just ordered a couple more movies on Depop, and I actually have a stack going over here of the movies that I've purchased recently, so that video is coming out very soon, probably, hopefully next Friday. But anyways, the reason why this movie sticks with me and why I'll never get tired of it, it's just so well done. I'm just such a fan of really strong plots. I love a good plot heavy movie, and I love when the plot doesn't just like spoon feed you. I like when you have to kind of get places yourself a little bit. Now, some people do say that this movie is boring, and like that's fair because, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinions. However, I just feel like the parts that kind of drag on a little bit for some people are just the parts that like might not have as many scares in them. And like, granted, there aren't as many scares in this movie as I think there are in most other traditional horror movies. However, I think that there are a great deal, and like the entire atmosphere of the movie and the coloring is so like uncomfortable and offbeat, and yet I mean it's gorgeous at the same time though, because it's just all these like green and blues, grays, like very sad tones. And so despite there being like maybe a lack of like jump scares, maybe a little lack of horror elements, the whole aesthetic of the movie just completely makes up for that for me, and it's such a relaxing movie for me to watch. I mean, it is still terrifying, like I still think it's a very scary movie, and I think it's like really good in terms of horror. However, visually, oh, beautiful, just so relaxing. I think that Gore Verbinski is honestly a really underrated director. Like, I mean, he did like the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Those are obviously not underrated, but him as a director, like no one, when they talk about the Pirates of the Caribbean, they're not like, oh yeah, I love Gore Verbinski. But not only did he do The Ring, but he did A Cure for Wellness, which I think is such an underrated movie. I also want to do an underrated horror movie list because I have plenty. But despite the ending of that movie, A Cure for Wellness is an amazing horror movie, and like it's shot equally as beautifully as The Ring. Anyways, okay, I'm not here to talk about that one. But The Ring is just one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, not just one of my favorite horror movies, but one of my favorite movies of all time. And I feel like I have yet to find another horror movie with such a strong plot. Because of course there are other movies that are a little bit more plot heavy rather than being scare or entertainment value heavy. But this one feels the most like coherent to me and the most well written. I'm sure there's some I'm just like not thinking of right now, but I don't know. I guess I would compare it to like Get Out and Us, the way that it's so well rounded and the way that there's so few loose ends and everything is tied together so nicely. It's just one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It might even be my number one. I'm not sure because that's a topic for another day. I feel like I would need to really like lay out my top horror movies of all time and like really take them all into consideration before I officially say this is my number one of all time, but it's up there and it very well might be. So all that being said and all those movies being shared, I know I only talked about 6 of them and there are several more that I feel very strong connections to, so if you'd like a part 2, definitely let me know. But I'm gonna wrap it up here. If you're new, I post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on this channel at 5 o'clock p.m. I also have a vlog channel, but I mainly post like my travel stuff over there, and then every once in a while I'll do kind of a random miscellaneous video that just like doesn't really fit on this channel. So check it out if you're so inclined. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Kai Johns. On my Instagram, I'm always updating you guys on whatever I'm watching that day, so you guys can watch it too, just in case I do a review of it. I also have a horror tab where I just post like the new movies that I've bought or just other horror related news and stuff like that, because it's just one of the best places to like keep people updated. And I also forgot to mention it in my last couple of videos, but I do have a Letterboxd account that is also at Kai Johns, so you can follow me over there because I do reviews and I rate videos over there that I don't intend on talking about on my channel. So if there's a movie that you're curious to know my thoughts on, I might have already talked about it over there, so check out my Letterboxd if you would like to. As always, please check out the petitions and the GoFundMes down below. I update those every week, but other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!